Well, just as you coughed, we went live.
Oh,
Hi, everybody.
we're silent for like a minute and a half, and I
well,
cough just
I,
a moment when we're going live.
yeah, the delay. When we do these live streams, folks, and we start them, there's usually anywhere from a 10 to 30 second delay, but uh, sometimes the delay could be 1 or 2 minutes. I think the delay was something like 5 minutes. So I kind of just did a quick reset. Anyway, welcome tonight to the Joe and Joe Weather Show. A little bit late, starting with a 9 o'clock start. Let me just say a few things right off the bat, just to get it out there. First off, welcome to all of you who are new to my YouTube channel. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, and then when it's over, go to Joe Rayo's YouTube channel, Joe Rayo Weather, and make sure you subscribe to him so that you're never without. It's you got me and you got him, and you'll never be without weather info. Also, download my free weather apps on Google Play or on the App Store. The Meteorologist Joe Cioffi weather app, or in Google's case, you can just put Joe Cioffi in the search box, and it will come down. It's absolutely free, and you can get your own local forecast for your particular location, as well as my thoughts about weather going on in the Northeast and in the northern mid-Atlantic states, and every snowfall forecast map that the Weather Service puts out from northern Georgia all the way up to Caribou, Maine, is on there, and they update automatically. So just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so we actually have, Joe, a very colorful warnings map tonight. I want to bring that up front and center because it just there's a whole array of different colors and different warnings. We actually have blizzard warnings up for parts of upstate New York, and uh, you believe it or not, you don't really see it too often with respect to lake effect events this time of year, because usually, and I think Mr. Ray, you will concur on this, usually this time of year the lakes are frozen, and you don't really wind up having big lake effect events in late February and early March, but it's a little bit different this time of around, because the lakes ain't frozen. And I
Right.
got
In fact, yeah. In fact, on my YouTube discussion a few hours ago, Tim Veltman, one of our Joe and Joe fans, he was on with me a few hours ago, pointing up the fact that there were heavy snow accumulations expected along the lee of the lakes, and I told him and everybody else exactly what you just said. The fact that we have had hardly any ice on the lakes. The lakes are wide open. Cold air
yeah.
pouring in beginning tomorrow, picking up that moisture into the lee of the lakes, producing heavy, potentially heavy snow accumulation amounts, and that being blown around by those winds of 30 and 40 miles an hour. So it's not surprising that those blizzard warnings are in effect for places near the Great Lakes, even though, as you pointed out, at this time of the year, it doesn't happen too often because usually those lakes are shut down with ice, but not this year.
Yeah, the blizzard warnings up for southwestern New York and for north central New York. If you go up 81 north of Syracuse, you get into the blizzard warning area there, and they're forecasting 2 feet or more, 2 to 3 feet for areas up Tug Hill and a few other places up there in north central New York, and 1 to 2 feet south and west of Buffalo, and also into northwestern Pennsylvania and northeastern Ohio. We don't want to forget those areas back to almost to Cleveland, where there probably will be some sizable snowfalls out of this. We also have, by the way, wind advisories up for the western part of the Catskills westward and down through central Pennsylvania, both north and south. This is one of those odd situations. The tightest gradient with this storm that's coming up is actually to the west. Usually we wind up seeing the stronger winds along the coast, but this is a little bit different because of the low tracking uh, from western Pennsylvania and moving almost northeast up to the St. Lawrence Valley. So it's keeping the tightest gradient west of us. Not that it won't get windy, because it will.
Right. Right.
Yeah, okay.
You have to
uh,
understand. You have to understand, Joe. You're so comprehensive and concise in your explanations here that there's very little that I could add to. I mean, I could just sit here and just listen to you for
Well,
hours.
that was subtle as a garlic sandwich. Okay, so look, I'm going to put up the snowfall
I could be
forecast.
your, in other words, I can be your version of your version of Mike Pence.
Oh, very nice. No
I'll just,
politics.
I'll just
Okay.
stand behind you. I'll just
Nope.
stand behind you and
All
shake
right,
my
so
head.
stop the politics. All right, I don't know. Did you look at this closely upstate with the lake effect? Because I got the snowfall forecast map up, and they've got the Weather Service prints has a 9 for Syracuse and a 7 for Rochester, 8 for Buffalo, and the bigger amounts are going to be away from those bigger cities and closer to the lake shores. But they got a 30. They got that bright yellow sitting up I-81 north of Syracuse as you head toward Pulaski and eventually up
Yeah,
further north than that. I mean, that's 30 to 35 inches they're forecasting for in there.
right. Well, speaking of Sir, I used to forecast for a radio station in Syracuse, WRHP. I'm not even sure if the call letters still remain. RHP was for Roy H. Clark, who owned that station. He also owned WPAT, the elevator music station here in New York. I was on both of those stations, so I'm well aware of the lake effect regarding snow amounts in and around the Syracuse area. But keep in mind, tomorrow we're going to be exposed to a flat out straight west wind. That west wind is going to go straight across the entire length and breadth of Lake Ontario, so that by the time it reaches the lee side of or the eastern end of Lake Ontario, it will have picked up a lot of moisture, and with that coming straight at you, you are right in the line of fire for the most possible snow. Which is why, as you pointed out, as you go up I-81 from Syracuse on north, that's going to take you right into that zone. That is the area that is encompassed by Watertown. That is also the area that Old Town has mentioned, Barnes Corners, which in a typical year picks up something like 200 or 300 inches of snow just on lake effect alone. So this is a prime situation for them. Although more prime, Joe, as we just mentioned, something that you'd see more often in November and December and maybe early
Right.
January, as opposed to the end of February and March, because again, at this time of the year, usually that end of the lake is frozen, and you don't really get the lake effect to any great degree. But again, this is a weird winter, and that's exactly what's happening now.
Well, I had the NAM up there for everybody to see with respect to you describing the west winds. We all winds blow counterclockwise around lows, but they're not linear to the isobars. They actually cross the isobars. The winds blow out of across the isobars away from high pressure and into low pressure. So you might have a northwest isobar, the isobar making it look like the wind is more going to be northwest, but in reality, it's more westerly, and that's what I'm illustrating here. And the NAM picks up on some pretty solid snow in that whole zone on the backside of the low and out of the lake. So also, just don't want to leave the folks out in Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, and there'll probably be a band of snow that extends down through West Virginia and into western North Carolina. In fact, some of the Weather Service offices have actually put up some advisories and even some winter storm warnings for parts of uh, West Virginia. There's some winter storm warnings there in the mountains, and I just want to bring up the North Carolina mountains here just to see. Yeah, it's a small area, but mainly from Boone and Asheville, west of Boone and Asheville, they have winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings on the Tennessee side near Gatlinburg. And I want to let's bring their snowfall forecast map from the Weather Service. So hang on one second there. I mean, they're not going for very much down there, but generally an inch or less. But their threshold, the darker blues that they're not picking up on some of the cities here, give you an indication there's probably going to be some elevation-driven snows down even into the Western Carolinas.
And interesting, Joe, with Buffalo. Um, Whereas right now, what we're talking about here is basically a flatline wind and a very gusty, robust westerly wind. But if you're in the Buffalo area, your snow wind is not westerly. It's more like a southwesterly wind coming across Lake Erie. And when you have a very strong southwesterly wind, it comes literally right into the city. And there are actually it's interesting in Buffalo, there are parts of the city that get hammered with tremendous snows. You can go like a couple of miles away and
And
see
there's
other parts of the
nothing.
city that have nothing. You know,
Well,
it's a very, lake effect is a very, very odd and unusual and wondrous weather phenomenon. And you have often said it, and I've said it too. I would love at least once in my life to experience a true lake effect
Well, I'll tell you
snow.
something. I could, you know what? If I had I have too much going on right now personally to have done this. But if it wasn't for that, I really would have gotten in the car today and driven up there for this. I mean, especially because of the winter we've had. But I've always wanted to see, and I have. There's someone that I talk to from time to time who lives near Pulaski, and I've got the map up here. His name is Shane Muckey, and he's a big fisherman up that way. But he's also big on astronomy, so he's always putting up pictures when they have the geomagnetic storms, and you get the
Yes,
you get the beautiful northern lights there at 3 o'clock,
right.
and then with some really fantastic shots that he's taken. But I've seen some of the pictures he's also taken in lake effect events where you get thunderstorms that have developed in Lake Ontario with thunder snow that have
Yeah.
come ashore, and some of some of the displays and some of the lightning displays that he's taken shots of from up there have just been phenomenal. So I want, like you, I want to experience. I want to be able to just sit there in a lawn chair facing the lake and watching the squalls just come in. That's got to be amazing.
And look at the map that you have. I'm hoping that you still the map I'm looking at is the one that's still up there
Yeah, this is
because I
from
know
this is from NWS Buffalo.
Okay, so take note of the fact that the wind is primarily straight west from across Lake Ontario, which is why places like Watertown and Lowville and High Market are getting into the 19 to 26-inch range in Pulaski too. Now look to the south and west, and you'll see that Dunkirk has 11, Springville has 23. The wind in that zone is probably not straight west. It's probably more, I would suspect, west northwest. And so you're taking that moisture from Lake Erie and bringing it down on that west northwest trajectory and dumping it as snow in Dunkirk and Springville. But then notice Buffalo. Buffalo only he says, is going to get 8 inches. It's not a southwesterly wind. It's more of a, again, west northwest wind. So while they're going to get some lake effect in Buffalo, it's not the primary or the
Yeah,
prime.
they're actually probably getting the lake effect that they're probably getting is more from the western side of Lake Ontario with the
Right,
west northwest wind. But you're right
probably.
with respect to Buffalo. You see where the long fetches of Lake Erie goes northeast southwest. So when the wind is southwest or west southwest into Buffalo, and that January '77,
Oh,
which is the big that's the high water, the high snow mark for Buffalo in terms of snow. But that was an incredible lake effect event that occurred during that month that produced, and it was because of very prolonged west to southwest winds. But I guess look, if we were in December and we would have had this map up, it wouldn't be too unusual. But the fact, as you said, being that it's the end of February and it's a pure function, and oddly enough, Joe, Lake Ontario and Lake Erie were frozen over fairly early this year, back in late in because of the cold November and early December in this region.
right.
The lakes actually froze over early, but then they basically defrosted.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that 1977 January event that you just alluded to for Buffalo, I was living, as I think you were too, I was living in the Bronx and I used to do a lot of DXing. In other words, I used to like to listen to radio stations outside of New York City, and at night, the radio signals travel, much, much farther than during the day. And maybe one day we might actually get into a discussion about why that is. But I was listening to KBW up in WKBW is
WKBW,
up
yeah.
about 1500 on the dial. And during here, you're listening to a city that usually is very they know how to deal with snow, but they don't know how to deal when it instead of 24 or 30 inches, they're dealing with 60 inches of snow. I repeat that for all of you that didn't hear that the first time. 60 inches in that lake effect in 1977. And I'm listening to WKBW, and the announcer on the radio says very simply, all public and social events in the city are canceled tonight. Nobody went anywhere.
Not bad.
And that also generated a kind of a squall line of snow with the actual cold front that came in and through our area that same Friday night. I remember Alan Casper on CBS showing it on the radar, referring to the line as a stick of a very intense snow. There were actually, I think, blizzard conditions, blizzard warnings out, Joe, with that stick or that line that was moving into the New York metropolitan area. In fact, I remember Alan saying on the air with Jim Jensen, people have been calling into the CBS Weather Center and asking when the hurricane is coming. It
Yeah.
was that tremendous a push of cold air,
Hmm.
and indeed, whereas temperatures that afternoon and evening and that Friday in New York were in the 20s and low 30s, the following morning they were at or below zero everywhere, and the high temperature in New York the next day was something like 10.
And
That's
as I
really
recall,
push of
as I recall, the vast majority of the time from just before Christmas right on through the first week of February, I think the number of times the temperature went above 32 was basically boiled down to about a handful of hours
right.
in that stretch. That was an incredibly cold stretch. I got the satellite loop up at the moment, and you can see there's all this moisture that's coming up out of the eastern Gulf of Mexico, riding northeastward up the eastern seaboard, the energy that's swinging around with the developing low in western Pennsylvania. We talked about this yesterday, and I'm going to bring up, Joe, the F-Gen, so we can look at the possibility of whether there might even be a couple of thunderstorms here tomorrow morning. I haven't talked to you since yesterday, so I was just wondering what your feeling about that is.
Well, I can see right now on the National Mosaic radar that there is a snaky line, a narrow snaky type line over in it looks like central Pennsylvania,
Yeah, let me just bring up the
and that
radar.
looks
I'm going to bring the radar up here.
and yeah, and if that holds together using the Alan Casper Pittsburgh rule, that looks like it's about 5 hours away if it holds together, which means that we might be looking at some convection in the tri-state area by about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So I would go with that, and also the Omega on today's NG
NAM.
on the NAM, the 12 and the 3 kilometer NAM
Well, I have the
suggest
zero. I have the new zero Z up there, so keep going. I'm moving
that
it
that arm
along.
of that arm of energy is going to be crossing through here sometime around 4 to 6 a.m. So yeah, why not? Why not mention rumbles of thunder and flashes of lightning? And I'm sure that in a span of just a few hours, we're going to see anywhere from I would say a half to maybe 3/4 of an inch of rain coming down. On my Davis weather station that I have on a mast outside in my backyard, it always lights up or flashes. It's raining cats and dogs when it comes down particularly hard. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be doing that flashing when I'm watching the Inside the Eyelids show at 4 or 5 in the morning tomorrow morning.
Here's the. I'm going to bring the surface map up here because you can see how the NAM at least displays. Like I have the tight northeast view, and there's it's after about 10 or 11 o'clock. You suddenly have all these showers that kind of bubble up. It does have this arm of moderate to heavy rain. The 12-kilometer NAM is not really overly convective here. I'm going to switch to the 3. Uh, the 3 I think has a bit more of a convective look to it when you look at how the 3 reflects the radar. Actually shows a fairly solid line of storms moving across Pennsylvania here and into Maryland and Delaware. By this is what the 3-kilometer NAM has it looking like at 1 a.m. And of course you can see the breakout of snow in western Pennsylvania, western New York, and then you get these heavy showers. Much of this is probably going to be over with by 6 or 7 a.m. It's
Yeah,
pretty
and I
quick.
on the Storm Prediction Center they have a thunderstorm outlook map, and it shows that. from now till 4Z or 11 o'clock this evening, we're not in any thunderstorm probability range. But then from 11 o'clock this evening till 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, they put us in a broad area of 10%. I would have actually have been a little bit, I'm a little surprised. I would have put at least a bluish zone of possibly 40% for parts of Pennsylvania up until about midnight tonight, but they don't have that. They don't have quite a high thunderstorm outlook. Maybe they think the thunderstorms are going to be breaking down, but actually, I think since this is kind of like a triple point driven weather front, and parts of the tri-state area may actually get into a warm sector briefly, that may actually add to the juice, so to speak, to bubble up some thundery activity. It'll be interesting to see after midnight tonight until about 6 or 7 in the morning tomorrow exactly what does pop up with the approach of this very sharp weather system.
I haven't really looked at anything this afternoon, so I'm just kind of doing it on the fly with you right now. Noticing that this very cold upper trough in the east, one of the rare times the last 2 months we're actually going to see cold air sitting around for more than a day or two. Instead, this will be maybe more like a day or three because it lasts into
Yep.
Sunday. Gotta wait for this whole trough to just kind of pull out, and unfortunately, I'm just kind of looking at this, Joe. The way the upper air is set up, it's too, for snow lovers. There's one last arm that comes through on Friday, and unfortunately for snow lovers, it's too close to the coast to really amount to anything other than some clouds and maybe some areas well inland north and west might see a couple of snow showers out of it. There'll probably be some kind of coastal low that develops well east of Virginia and then rides the fire hose out in the Atlantic. And of course, that trough pulls out. The next round of troughing drops more in the west. I mean, not quite along the west coast. It's more like the Rockies and Plains. But it doesn't matter because that means that we'll probably warm up ahead of it next week for a day or two. And then that trough swings out. And guess what? That one goes by and lifts up and out and running it through the long range, um, no wash, rinse, repeat. That's all I can. I think that's the best way to describe what we're in. It's a wash, rinse, repeat pattern for the last 2+ months, and you would think that this would be a time where we could probably start to see something trying to break down. There is no sign of it at all. In fact, it's even worse late in the period, and by that time it's March 13th. The fat lady has sung. Okay.
Right. 366 hours on the GFS, the 18Z, shows some semblance of maybe a significant northeast snowstorm. But again, folks, that's that's about 15 days out. And what have we been seeing every single time we've looked to 10 and 12 and 15 days out on all of these models, including the European, the possible promise of a significant snowstorm or significant nor'easter or whatever. And once we get to that particular point in time,
Exactly.
I thought I'd add my sound effect there.
Now listen, hey, that's boop boop ba-doo. So
Yeah.
there's our low for tomorrow. Deepens pretty rapidly as it moves up into upstate New York and finds its way up near the St. Lawrence River. In Canada, redevelops near Nova Scotia, and of course, the lake effect eventually does shut off Thursday night. Fires up again a bit on Friday as that second upper trough swings around. You can also see some of the snows with that second upper trough swinging around that move into West Virginia, Western Virginia, down into the Carolina Mountains, and then that moves out. I think for the most part, Joe, I mean, it's going to be cold over the Friday and particularly I think Saturday into Sunday until the high moves out. And then, of course, you get this next weather system that starts to approach with warmer air, maybe a few showers coming in. The GFS actually has a little bit of rain and snow shower activity arriving late Monday afternoon, and then it's all rain, of course. So you got another front, another round of showers, and then another low comes up from the south with more rain and maybe some snow up in northern New England, which is where it always snows these days. Yeah, there's nothing here. There's nothing. There's nothing really new about this that we're seeing.
Now, so may I put a sounder here on the winter overall so far, since you gave me the idea just about a minute ago?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I wanted you to do.
That pretty much tells the story, folks.
It sure does. All right, so let me very quickly run through. I'm going to just run through real quick, and then we'll come full screen and get on the chat board with everybody. So here's a WPC, the 7-day forecast for rainfall. It is substantial across the Ohio Valley and the Middle Mississippi Valley. As we remember, this takes us to through next Wednesday. So you've got those next weather systems early next week that will impact there. And of course, you're seeing some of that impacting the Northeast. So the Northeast is kind of a combination of what's going on now. In the West, we've got the Pacific Northwest getting busy, a bit on the busy side, precip-wise in the Northern and Central Rockies. WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, with their probability of at least 2 inches of snow in the next 72 hours. And clearly, you're going to see this huge area up the Appalachians and in through the interior Northeast, much of upstate New York, particularly in and around the lakes, 100% probability of at least 2. I'm going to jump over, Joe, because we don't get to use it too often. But even the probability of at least 8, which I'm putting up right now from WPC, it's pretty sizable in Southwest New York. East of the lakes, there's a 80 to 100% probability of at least 8 up in those areas. See, this is the thing, and I know you're gonna agree with me about this. This is where, no, you will, but this is when we do get snow down here in the I-95 corridor, as a forecaster, it's always a nerve-wracking, hair-pulling struggle because there are so many ways that you could wind up where the snow doesn't wind up happening or doesn't happen as robust. Or sometimes it's the other way, and you wind up with which more than you expect. See, up here, it's like if you're a forecaster and there's 100% probability of at least 8, you can just basically put your feet up.
Exactly.
And all you're concerned with really is the direction of the wind, and that's it.
Right.
A little bit of lift. Okay, so you want to get a little detailed. You start looking at all these different levels, but the bottom line is, your wind direction, that pretty much dictates it all.
I remember when I first, and this goes way back to when I first got into this business. One of the first radio stations that landed in my lap was WROC in Rochester, and I was scared, actually. Not so much that I wasn't aware of the fact that there's lake effect in the snow belt areas. I was just scared about the fact that I would only go for, let's say, a 12 or 16-inch amount, and that it in turn it would end up going like
and it
18,
wasn't
18 or
enough.
30. Yeah, it wasn't enough. You're right. There's no real problem once you've done it for a long enough time in forecasting up there, as opposed to down here when you have to worry about, well, maybe enough mild air will come in from off the ocean, and parts of the area will see a change over to sleet or ice or rain, and inland it's going to be snow or that. It's a whole different story, as you just mentioned. Further to the north and west, no real problems. Most of the snow situations are what we would call well behaved, so to speak.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, here it is, down coast, it's always, we're always battling something. But on the other hand, when you're up, when you live in upstate New York and snow in the wintertime is your way of life, I don't think it's a big shock to anybody up there when it snows. I think it's probably a bigger shock when it doesn't snow.
Yeah.
Or when the lakes don't freeze over, and so in a number of ways for that part of upstate New York, it's probably a bigger surprise. The kind of winter that they've had up there has been a bit strange.
But Joe, if you're going to ask somebody in the northeastern part of the country when this winter is all over, said and done, what did you think of the winter? You're going to get people from Washington to Baltimore to Philadelphia to New York and even on up to Boston. They've had more snow than we have, but all across that corridor, you're going to hear people say, it really wasn't much of a winter. We had some snow. We didn't have any snow. Blah, blah, blah. But you don't have to go all that far west and north of the 95 corridor. You would get quite a different story. Like, for example, Tim Veltman. I mean, like, how did you like this winter, Tim? I mean, like, you kicked off the season with 22 inches of snow in Albany. Now,
Hmm.
I know that you haven't had all that much since, but still, 22 inches, you're going to remember that when you look back on this winter. And the winter may not be over just yet. And for places like Albany and points west and north,
Yeah,
look what we're looking at for the next few days. It's crazy.
you're
What
right.
a dichotomy. You're going from feast to famine, so to speak.
Yeah, I really, now, looking at everything that's going on, and pulling up the Weather Service snowfall forecast maps are up there, and I'm like, I really want to just get into my car and drive up, and that would have at least, I'm coming up to 300,000 miles on my Toyota. I'm
Oh,
at
wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm
what?
looking at my email. I'm getting looking at my email here. And
Yes,
for all of you who have NYSEG like I do, my
yes.
power comes from New York State Electric and Gas, special weather alert. We are currently preparing for the potential of significant snowfall
Oh,
and
good
high
God,
winds
no, 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 Joe, no,
across the
no,
state beginning early
no.
Thursday morning.
Wait a
The
minute,
storms,
but NYSEG goes
I'm reading it, I'm verbatim.
but
I'm,
NYSEG goes how far up?
well, they go up to, I think, Syracuse and,
All right, so I mean, obviously they're referring to that area for the snow. They cannot
right.
possibly be referring to you for that.
No, well, still, if we get a significant wind, I can tell you that the wind goes over 45 here. Although,
You're out for a week.
no, I shouldn't say that because here in Putnam Valley, the guys here who they have been spending the last 2 or 3 months trimming a lot of the trees down. And I have to say that in the cases like maybe a few years ago with a windstorm, I might have lost my power like that. Haven't done that so far. Now that I say that, of course, now I'm jinxing myself. Knock on wood. But they've done a damn good job in trimming the trees and keeping the branches and limbs away from the power lines or whatever. But a significant windstorm from my neck of the woods could do something like that. But of course, upstate, they're concerned with, as I just mentioned here, NYSEG alerting for the possibility of significant snow and high winds. And he says, we urge you to monitor latest weather forecasts and prepare for the possibility. We will be doing all our best to stay on top of the storms, that kind of stuff. So anyway, if
Frank,
you have NYSEG, that that's what they're telling everybody to be aware
yeah,
of.
and don't
So
don't flip off Joe's switch, okay? Uh, so Frank Riccio says, Joe, have you ever had you seen a pattern last this long, and any idea what caused it? Um, it's if we depending on how you want to date it, I would probably say December 19th, 20th was when we kind of we changed to uh, the away from the pattern that we had from mid October through mid December. So that lasted about 9 weeks. Now, since then, we've been from mid December through mid February. This one's gone longer. Usually 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks before something changes. But this one's now pushing on the door of 9 or 10 weeks. This is
right.
pretty unrelenting. I can remember some of the better winters for the I-95 corridor, where like for example, I would say 14, 15 would be one where we were in the same pattern from mid-January when it first started to turn really cold, around January 19th or 20th, and it lasted till the very end of March. Okay, so that went uh, over 2 months. Uh, the winter of 13, 14 was pretty much unrelenting. That was long. That started from the beginning of December and carried right up until the day before the first day of spring.
Right.
The way I measured a pattern. So um, this particular pattern has really hung on. Um, I would have thought that by now we would have seen some breakdown, but and I think I honestly, for me, I think it's all about the polar vortex up in the Arctic region. It locked up. It never broke down. It just locked all the cold air up there, and
You know,
it has refused.
but this is why you say that this is a very, very long pattern that we've been into. And I have been saying for the last couple of weeks that I just have this gut feeling that toward the end of March or maybe even the beginning of April, that we're going to see a sudden change and sudden turnover to maybe the most wintry weather pattern we've seen all of this winter season, even though it's the winter will be officially over, both meteorologically and astronomically. But I just think that maybe the cork is finally going to pop out of the bottle, so to speak, toward the end of next this upcoming month of March, and something is going to happen. Something weird is going to take place. So we'll see how it all. But certainly, from people who are watching me on my YouTube uh, broadcast a few hours ago and asking how does March look like, forget about the first week or 10 days of March. That's pretty well,
Done.
that nothing is going to happen during that time frame. It maybe will happen something later on in the month, maybe.
Well, if it is, you got to get this polar vortex up in the Arctic region to break down. And I just really quick pulled up the the 10 millibar, the stratosphere, and as I said, the last day on this is March 13th, and it's still wrapped up like a tight little ball right over the North Pole, closer to the Siberia side than say northern Greenland. All the cold air is just pretty much still locked away up in that region, at least from the way the stratosphere is setting up. And when you look at the upper air at 18,000 feet, um, at that point, 16 days from now, here's your polar here's your cold air. Okay, it's all when I say cold, I'm talking Arctic air. It's all way up. Still no sign of it advancing down. So you got to get the whole setup up in the Arctic region for your scenario to be correct. And I'm not saying that it won't be, but you're going to have to hope that by the middle part of the month of March that this whole complex up here starts to break down and break down in a
Right,
hurry.
right.
Because if you don't, we're going to wind up going into some fairly warm air as we move through the month of March and going into the latter part of the month.
Well, yeah. I think, why don't we just assume that the deadline for possibly seeing a breakdown will be St. Patrick's Day, and if we don't see anything by then, any sign of it by then, even if we saw something, let's say toward the end of March, it still would probably take a week or two, and by that time, probably once we get into early April, it'll be too. And you know what's going to happen then? We'll just end up with a long, protracted spell of a cold or chilly rain, and who wants to see that?
Well,
Uh,
Alfred Phillips is up in Wainwright, Alaska. He's on tonight. So I don't know what your temperature is up there. When I looked at yesterday, I think it was 24 below zero up in your area. You're still holding on to all the cold, but you know these transient shots of cold air, Joe. There's no blocking, there's no nothing. It just the cold air comes in, goes out, and that's the end of it.
and this event coming up in the next 24 to 48 hours for the Northeast in general, an exciting period if you're a winter weather lover. But if you're in the I-95 corridor, yet another disappointing spell of weather.
Yep. Alfred
With
Phillips says, by the way, it's 36 below, wind chills of minus 54.
See now, yeah, and this is another thing. People think that when they talk about global warming, a lot of people are saying, yeah, there's no cold air anywhere. They think that Alaska is warm, for example, or the polar regions are warm. They're not. If anything, they have been more cold or exceptionally cold this particular season because again, all that cold air has just been sitting there locked up and not being able to spread out or go anywhere. So it
Right.
has been, and Albert probably attest to that. It has been just a pretty darn cold winter up there.
And the sea ice issue, which was was at record lows going into this fall, is now it was a pretty it's been pretty robust in terms of the development of sea ice across the Arctic region. It's the
Right.
highest. The coverage is the highest and the deepest since going back to 2012. So certainly the highest in the last 8 years. and we've been in some kind of low cycle. You know what? Trying to understand how this all works, all these cogs in the wheel, all these gears that are turning and and constantly turning and changing. It's so much. It's like above my pay grade. It's way too. You can't even stay ahead of it. You try to find something, anything that gives you a leg up to say, okay, you know what, the polar vortex is doing this, therefore this has to happen here and that has to happen there, and then turns out that it doesn't happen, and you start to wonder, well, why?
And now
Um,
you flip now, Joe. In recent years, what have we been hearing about from all of those folks who have been talking about climate change and global warming? Oh, the sea ice is disappearing up in the North Polar region. Oh, the sea ice is diminishing. Meanwhile, at the same time, all of that was happening in Antarctica. The ice was building up, building up, building up. And now, this particular season, it's just the opposite. The sea ice, because of the polar vortex trapping all that cold air, has grown to an extent that we have not seen in many, many years. And meantime, what's happening in Antarctica? I saw one article today that said that Antarctica, because of the unusually warm weather they've had, the 65-degree temperature was recorded a few weeks ago, that they've lost about 20% of their ice, which is the greatest amount that they've ever seen in recent years. So everything is just like flip-flop from
right.
all the years that we've been looking at.
It's all nuts.
Yeah.
uh, let's see. Oh, DJ Daniels wants to know what's the latest day in April that New York City has gotten snow. I want to say April 25th.
No, the any kind of snow,
Well, I know
any
the May 9th,
May
1977.
9th,
But
1977. Yeah.
in terms of accumulating snow, for some reason April 25th sticks in my head, or around that time.
Well,
You
I
going to
mean,
do
there's
a quick lookup?
one way to find out. You just go to the
In the meantime, on Briller Jeopardy today, what was the first letter Vanna White turned over on Wheel of Fortune?
Oh, give me a break. Here's a good Briller Jeopardy or Jeopardy concerning Wheel of Fortune. Who was the first host of Wheel of Fortune, and who was the gal who preceded Vanna White?
Okay, I know who the first host is. Okay,
Okay,
it was
well, who
Chuck
was it?
Woolery.
Chuck
Right,
Woolery.
Chuck
Who was
Woolery.
the?
Right now, did he leave the show on a contract dispute or decided that he didn't want to do it? What was the deal with that?
I don't
I never
remember.
really never really knew. I don't
But
know
they
who the pre Vanna White was. Oh,
Susan Stratford, and
oh, that
and
name's familiar.
she remained with the show when Pat Sajak came on. She was still doing spinning letters,
Right.
but eventually she moved on, and Vanna came in. And incidentally, when Vanna took off for a while, or went on vacation, or was sick in the first few years that she was on Wheel of Fortune, Susan Stratford came back to fill in for her. So she was still, I guess, viable or valid for doing that as a fill-in basis. But that was a long time. That was over 30 years ago now. But that was who was the original. You're right. The first host and the first wheels, the word or letter spinner.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so
John.
there you go.
No. Well, yeah. I actually I saw Chuck Woolery on a commercial for gold and silver the other day. I think that's what it was.
Well,
Um. So. John Curtis says believers of sunspot and solar flare activities have failed us too. Well, all I've been hearing for the last couple of years has been grand solar minimum, grand solar minimum, grand solar minimum, and okay, well, where is it then? I mean, where
well,
is all this
this
cold air?
the sun has been without spots for many days, many weeks now. It is asleep. There's hardly any activity in terms of solar activity or sunspots or whatever. And yeah, you would think that, well, how come it's not all that cold? It's anything but, at least in our neck of the woods. And as I mentioned before, I spoke once to Gavin Schmidt, who is a climatologist who studies these things for NASA, and I mentioned the so-called Maunder minimum, when there was no sunspots and no solar activity from 1645 to 1715, which coincided with the Little Ice Age. And I said, was that a correlation? Is that why it was so cold? And he said, absolutely not. That we had an unusual amount of volcanic activity, which put up ash and dust and aerosol clouds into the atmosphere, which helped to act like a shade and block the light of the sun. And he said that was what lowered temperatures. It had nothing to do with sunspots and solar activity. So he is among those who claim that it doesn't matter what the sun does, whether it's active or inactive or whatever. But still, there are others who claim that there is a correlation. So, like I said, who the heck knows?
Alfred
Uh,
Phillips says weird ocean mist, dark black yellow mist up where he is this week might be a methane leak somewhere.
Lovely.
Yeah, I don't. One of these days, I don't know if I'll ever make it up to the North Slope of Alaska, but um, I would love to see what's up there.
When my dearly departed Yorkie Comet, who I called Woofy, passed away last April or whatever, but one of the things we used to do when I used to get home at night was he would jump on the couch with me and we would watch Perry Mason or Stephen Colbert or something. And occasionally I'd give him like a chip or potato chip. I wasn't supposed to do that, but the
Right.
dog lasted almost 16 years. So don't tell me that I sent him to an early death because he lived a good long life. But every once in a while, Joe, with him sitting next to me there, I would suffer or I would detect a methane leak.
Yeah, no, I get it. My dog too.
Is that you?
Hey, so listen, it's coming up on 10 o'clock and it's already late, and um, my my eyes are drooping here. So
By the
let's.
way, you're absolutely right, Joe. You hit it right on the nose. April 25th, 1945, Central Park, 3 inches of snow.
Oh, see, I do remember certain things. I don't know why it stuck in my head. April 25th.
April
Uh,
25th, 1945, and that was followed by the rest of the month. Through the end of April, it was just a trace amount. The day before, they had a half an inch, so that was from 1968. So really, once you get past mid-April, uh, amounts beyond a trace are few and far
yeah.
between.
Oh, exactly. All right. So look, let's call it a night. We'll be on tomorrow night, probably at the usual time, and we'll see what the lake effect in upstate New York has produced. Everybody, thanks for being here. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, what little is left, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show.
Ta-da!